This is probably what successful propaganda machines aim to do. This creating false memory across thousands, if not millions of minds.
Yeah, absolutely. This is exactly what they do. And so all these kind of foibles of human memory get magnified when you start to have social interactions. There's a whole literature on something called social contagion, which is basically when misinformation spreads like a virus. Like you remember the same thing that I did, but I give you a little bit of wrong information, then that becomes part of your story of what happened. Because once you and I share a memory, like I tell you about something I've experienced and you tell me about your experience of the same event,
Mm-hmm.
it's no longer your memory or my memory, it's our memory.
Mm-hmm.
And so now the misinformation spreads. And the more you trust someone or the more powerful that person is, the more of a voice they have in shaping that narrative, right? And there's all sorts of interesting ways in which misinformation can happen. There's a great example of when John McCain and George Bush Jr. were in a primary, and there were these polls where they would do these, like, I guess they were like not robocalls, but real calls where they would poll voters, but they actually inserted some misinformation about McCain's beliefs on taxation, I think, and maybe it was something about illegitimate children, or I don't really remember. But they included misinformation in the question that they asked, like, how do you feel about the fact that he wants to do this or something? And so people would end up becoming convinced he had these, policy things or these personal things that were not true, just based on the polls that were being used. So it was a case where, interestingly enough, the people who were using misinformation were actually ahead of the curve relative to the scientists who were trying to study these effects in memory.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So it's not just about truth and falsehoods, like us as intelligent reasoning machines, but it's the formation of memories where they become like visceral. You can rewrite history. If you just look throughout the 20th century, some of the dictatorships with Nazi Germany, with the Soviet Union, effective propaganda machines can rewrite our conceptions of history, how we remember our own culture, our upbringing, all this kind of stuff. And you could do quite a lot of damage in this way. And then there's probably some kind of social contagion happening there. Like certain ideas that are maybe initiated by the propaganda machine can spread faster than others. You could see that in modern day, certain conspiracy theories, there's just something about them that they are like really effective at spreading. There's something sexy about them to people, to where something about the human mind eats it up and then uses that to construct memories as almost as if they almost were there to witness whatever the content of the conspiracy theory is. It's fascinating because once you feel like you remember a thing, I feel like there's a certainty, it emboldens you to like say stuff. Like you really like, it's not just you believe an idea is true or not. You're like, it's at the core of your being that you feel like you were there to watch the thing happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in what you're saying. I mean, one of the things is that people's sense of collective identity is very much tied to shared memories. If we have a shared narrative of the past, or even better, if we have a shared past, we will feel more socially connected with each other, and I will feel part of this group. They're part of my tribe if I remember the same things in the same way. And you brought up this weaponization of history. And, it really speaks to, I think, one of the parts of memory, which is that if you have a belief, you will find, and you have a goal in mind, you will find stuff in memory that aligns with it, and you won't see the parts in memory that don't. So a lot of the stories we put together are based on our perspectives, right? And so let's just zoom out for the moment from like misinformation, take something even more fascinating, but not as like, scary. I was reading Tan Viet Nguyen, but he wrote a book about the collective memory of the Vietnam War. He's a Vietnamese immigrant who was flown out as after the war was over. And so he went back to his family to get their stories about the war. And they called it the American War, not the Vietnam War, right? And that just kind of blew my mind, having grown up in the US and having always heard about it as the Vietnam War. But of course they call it the American War because that's what happened. America came in, right? And that's based on their perspective, which is a very valid perspective. And so that just gives you this idea of the way we put together these narratives based on our perspectives. And I think the opportunities that we can have in memory is if we bring groups together from different perspectives and we allow them to talk to each other and we allow ourselves to listen. I mean, right now you'll hear a lot of just jammering, people going blah, blah, blah about free speech, but they just want to listen to themselves, right? I mean, it's like, let's face it, the old days before people were supposedly woke, they were trying to ban Two Live Crew or, just think about Lenny Bruce got canceled for cursing. Jesus Christ, it's like, this is nothing new.
Yeah.
People
Continue.
don't like to hear things that disagree with them. But if you're you can see two situations in groups with memory. One situation is you have like people who are very dominant who just take over the conversation, and they basically, what happens is the group remembers less from the experience and they remember more of what the dominant narrator says, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you have a diverse group of people, and I don't mean diverse in necessarily the human resources sense of the word, I mean diverse in any way you want to take it, right? But diverse in every way, hopefully. And you give everyone a chance to speak and everyone's being appreciated for their unique contribution, you get more accurate memories and you get more information from it, right? Even two people who come from very similar backgrounds, if you can appreciate the unique contributions that each one has, you can do a better job of generating information from memory. And that's a way to inoculate ourselves, I believe, from misinformation in the modern world. But like everything else, it requires a certain tolerance for discomfort. And I think when we don't have much time, and I think when we're stressed out and when we are just tired, it's very hard to tolerate discomfort.
And I mean, social media has a lot of opportunity for this because it enables this distributed one-on-one interaction that you're talking about where everybody has a voice, but still our natural inclination, you see this on social media, is there's a natural clustering of people and opinions, and you just kind of form these kind of bubbles. I think to me personally, I think that's a technology problem that could be solved. If there's a little bit of interaction, kind, respectful, compassionate interaction with people that have a very different memory, that respectful interaction will start to intermix the memories and ways of thinking to where you're slowly moving towards truth. But that's a technology problem because naturally, left to our own devices, we want to cluster up in a tribe.
Yeah, and that's the human problem.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the problems that come up with technology aren't the technology itself as much as the fact that people adapt to the technology in maladaptive ways. I mean, one of my fears about AI is not what AI will do, but what people will do. I mean, take text messaging, right? It's like it's a pain in the ass to text people, at least for me. And so what happens is the communication becomes very Spartan and devoid of meaning, right? It's just very telegraphic. And that's people adapting to the medium, right? I mean, look at you. You've got this keyboard, right? That's like got these like dome-shaped things, and you've adapted to that to communicate, right? That's not the technology adapting to you. That's you adapting to the technology. And I think with one of the things I learned when Google started to introduce autocomplete in emails, I started to use it, and about a third of the time I was like, "This isn't what I want to say." A third of the time I'd be like, "This is exactly what I wanted to say," and a third of the time I was saying, "Well, this is good enough. I'll just go with it." Right? And so what happens is it's not that the technology necessarily is doing anything so bad as much as it's just going to constrain my language because I'm just doing what's being suggested to me. And so this is why I say, kind of like my mantra for some of what I've learned about everything in memory is to diversify your training data, basically, because otherwise you're going to be so like humans have this capability to be so much more creative than anything generative AI will put together, at least right now. Who knows where this goes? But it can also go the opposite direction where people could become much, much less creative if they just become more and more like resistant to discomfort, and resistant to exposing themselves to novelty, to cognitive dissonance, and so forth.